Chernobyl disaster. What happened at the nuclear power plant? On April 26, 1986, the city of Chernobyl, 130 kilometers north of Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, which was then part of the Soviet Union, was the scene of one of the worst environmental disasters in human history. The explosion at the fourth reactor of the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant near the city of Pripyat released radiation into the environment, 50 times more than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima in 1945. Following the explosion, radioactive material-laden clouds affected many countries, including Turkey. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster caused the direct or indirect deaths of approximately 200,000 people, according to some independent studies. Due to the effects of the disaster, hundreds of thousands of children were born with disabilities. Cancer cases increased. The negative effects of the accident are expected to last for generations. Discussions about the extent to which the traces of the nuclear disaster in Chernobyl pose a risk today continue to come up from time to time. When was the Chernobyl nuclear power plant built? Construction of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant began in 1970 in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, which was part of the Soviet Union at the time. The city of Pripyat was established 3 kilometers away for the personnel working at the plant and their families. The first reactor unit of the plant became operational in 1977. With the completion of 3 more power units, annual energy production reached 29 billion kilowatt-hours. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant was planned to be the world's largest nuclear power plant with 12 reactors, each with a capacity of 1,000 megawatts. Before the explosion, the plant operated with 4 reactors, and 2 more were under construction. The 4th unit, which suffered the accident, had been in operation for 3 years. The day before the accident, the reactor's power was reduced to approximately 1,600 megawatts, and the emergency cooling system was shut down for the test. Automatic power mode was switched too, but since the power stop setting was not set to 700 megawatts, the power level was reduced to 30 megawatts. What happened at the power plant on April 26th? On April 25th, 1986, preparations for routine preventive maintenance work began at the 4th reactor of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The operator pressed the reactor stop button, and the control rods began to move downward. The power level reached 100 times the nominal value within seconds. It was planned to test the turbine generator to be used as an additional power source in a possible future emergency. It was decided to conduct the experiment at a power level of 700 to 1,000 megawatts, at 23 to 10. The power level began to be reduced to 700 megawatts. The operator on duty attempted to restore power and eventually started the test at 200 megawatts, level lower than planned. At 1:23 on April 26th, the emergency stop signal came on the control panel. Kovalenko approached me and said that there was something strange about the reactor's operation. However, Dyatlov stopped him harshly and did not allow him to continue. I did not dwell on this because it was not my responsibility. Shared a memory he had the day before the explosion as follows. After the situation got out of control, 2 massive explosions occurred seconds apart, which started as a result of the error of operational personnel turned into a disaster, due to the inadequate design of the reactor. The reactor not meeting safety standards, and the inadequacy of general safety measures at the nuclear power plant. He was afraid of not being able to carry out the experiment. Chief engineer was an electrical engineer by profession. In this situation, there was only one thing he had to do: stop the reactor. Despite the professional responsibility they carried, they were afraid to make this decision. According to eyewitness accounts, the first explosion produced a red flame, second a blue flame, and then the plant was covered in a giant mushroom cloud. It caused the Chernobyl nuclear disaster and personnel errors, and accused the plant management of conducting the experiment at all costs. Debates continue today about the real causes of the greatest nuclear disaster in human history. The State Commission established in the Soviet Union at that time to investigate the causes of the accident declared the plant personnel and management as primarily responsible for the accident. For violating safety regulations, plant director Viktor Bryakanov and chief engineer Nikolai Fomin were each sentenced to 10 years in prison. Deputy chief engineer Anatoly Dyatlov to 5 years, reactor manager Alexander Kovalenko to 3 years, and shift manager Boris Rogoshkin and inspector Yuri Laukin to 2 years. Maxim Kremen, who was the manager of the personnel responsible for technical settings at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant at the time, and who served as the president of the Ukrainian Nuclear Energy and Industry Veterans Association in 2020. On April 25, 1986, while leaving the power plant after work, I came across Dyatlov and Kovalenko by chance. Kremen said he thought the reactor manager and deputy chief engineer were aware of the problem in the reactor, and continued. The deputy chief engineer did not have the determination to give the command to stop the reactor. The International Nuclear Safety Committee, within the International Atomic Energy Agency, also initially agreed with the Soviet Union. The incident report concluded that the accident occurred as a result of a combination of rule violations. However, in its new report on the accident published in 1991, the same institution determined that the accident, in its final report prepared in 1993, INSA claimed that some of the previous findings regarding personnel errors were incorrect and that the accident was likely to have occurred due to a design error in the reactor, although there have been claims that the accident may have been caused by an earthquake, sabotage, or a terrorist act. There is no evidence of these. No warnings were made about daily life. Maxim Kremen, who lives in Pripyat, woke up early on Saturday. They headed to the garage, which was about a kilometer from the nuclear power plant. He explains what happened next. On the way, I ran into an acquaintance who works at the plant. He told me that the roof of the fourth reactor had collapsed. The reactor cover had been lifted at a large angle and was hanging over the pipelines. I was shocked. When my son and I arrived at the garage, I saw smoke rising from the fourth block. All minibuses were stopped, and private cars were not allowed to go out either. When I went up to the roof of the garage, I saw a terrible sight. So I decided to go back home. My colleagues and I gathered at my house and started talking about the accident. It was impossible to leave Pripyat. April 26th in Pripyat was no different from any other day. There were no warnings or restrictions on daily life. People were gathering in groups and talking about the accident at the power plant. On Sunday, they started taking people away. On Saturday evening, the party and municipal leaders of Pripyat took their families out of the city. This news spread immediately. We were prisoners. But a moment came and everything that was precious to them was lost. Before the accident, everything was normal. People were buying cars, building their houses. They had hope. The explosion released approximately 380 million curies of radiation into the environment. More than 70,000 of these people were permanently disabled. The number of people evacuated from the 30-kilometer zone in May 1986 is shown by different data as between 116,000 and 350,000. Some time after the nuclear disaster, the people living in the city of Pripyat and the 10-kilometer area around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant were evacuated. The fire caused by the accident lasted 10 days. The Turkish Medical Association drew attention to the fact that the disaster particularly affected the eastern Black Sea region of Turkey, and that there may be a relationship between the disaster and cancer cases in the region. An area of 200,000 square kilometers, 70% of which is in the territory of Belarus, Ukraine and Russia, was affected by radiation. After the accident, clouds of radioactive materials spread to many countries in Europe. How many people lost their lives in the disaster is still a matter of debate today. The exclusion zone covered the territory of Ukraine and Belarus, and the city of Pripyat near the plant turned into a ghost town. It is reported that there is hardly a single apartment in the ghost city where valuables have not been stolen, and 80% were safe for growing food, according to a June 2024 report in the London-based New Scientist scientific journal. The nuclear disaster initially caused the deaths of 31 people working at the plant. However, the truly devastating effects of the accident became apparent later. According to some independent studies, the Chernobyl disaster caused the deaths of approximately 200,000 people, directly or indirectly. According to various data, it's between 600,000 and 800,000 personnel in the Soviet Union participated in the work to eliminate the effects of the disaster. Maxim Kremen was one of the people who took part in these studies in 1986, 1987, and was later awarded the Medal of Honor. As a result of the accident, 1.9 million people in Ukraine and a total of 8.4 million people in Belarus, Russia, Ukraine, in European countries were exposed to radiation. After the explosion, all the pine trees near the power plant turned red due to the high radiation and died. Almost all the animals disappeared. Different claims were made about the effects of the disaster on Turkey. In its 2006 report, insects have a shorter lifespan than normal, and rodents have low fertility levels. Other authorities claimed that there was no evidence of a link between cancer cases in the region and the disaster. What is the situation in Chernobyl today? After the explosion at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant in 1986, an area of about 4,000 square kilometers was left abandoned. There are police checkpoints 30 kilometers from the restricted area. Despite this, the city has been the scene of robberies and looting many times. For a long time, agriculture was forbidden, and new construction was not allowed in the area where radioactive pollution was present. But measurements taken on vast farmlands around the Chernobyl nuclear reactor concluded that radiation levels had fallen. The last operating reactor of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant was shut down on the 15th of December 2000. The wreckage of the reactor, where the nuclear disaster took place, was covered with a giant steel shield in 2016 to prevent radioactive leakage. The state enterprise, responsible for the safety of nuclear facilities and radioactive waste, environmental monitoring, and scientific studies, operates at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant, which is currently decommissioned. Projects to establish a solar power plant in the region and a nuclear fuel storage facility for Europe were also on the agenda. Chernobyl fire hits tourism. Forests that were exposed to high radiation after the nuclear disaster have now turned into a natural paradise. Many wild animals and hundreds of species of birds live in the area. And research has shown that the high levels of radiation do not have any serious negative effects on the wildlife in Chernobyl today. However, anomalies can be found in some animals. For example, albino is common among birds. The area where the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded and the city of Pripyat have been hosting tourists from all over the world in recent years. According to official data, 124,000 people visited the region in 2019. Partly due to the influence of the Chernobyl TV series, which attracted great attention all over the world. But after a forest fire that lasted nearly 2 weeks in April 2020, a third of Chernobyl's tourist attractions were destroyed. The burning of the Azumradnoye Soviet youth camp, where the wooden houses where the first liquidators lived after the nuclear disaster in 1986 were located, was one of the biggest losses. It is also stated that some tourism companies have suspended Chernobyl and Pripyat tours for security reasons. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What are the effects of nuclear disaster today? Chernobyl came to the fore again with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which began in February 2022. Personnel working in Chernobyl said that as of April 1, 2022, Russian soldiers who had taken over the former nuclear power plant had left the area. The International Atomic Energy Agency reported in its 2024 report that no change in the situation in Chernobyl was recorded in the mission launched to monitor nuclear power plants in Ukraine after the occupation. The most important negative impact of the disaster was that approximately 1 million hectares of land within the borders of Ukraine and Belarus remained under the influence of radioactive contamination for a long time. Controlling and burying the remains of nuclear fuel and radioactive materials are key issues today, said Ivan Kovalets, head of the Department of Environmental Informatics at the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, in an interview in 2020, stating that there are many radioactive substances at the bottom of the cooling pool of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The academic pointed out the following risks. If the pool dries up, these radioactive materials can be released into the air by the wind. Radioactive waste storage facilities in the region do not pose a security risk that could lead to the release of radioactive substances into the environment in the event of fire, flood, or hurricane. Forest fires in the Chernobyl region can also increase radioactive activity. The report stated that the increase in measured radiation levels was very low and did not pose a risk to human health. A large number of experts need to work regularly in the region to solve all these problems, so of course they are dangerous. However, since they are usually stored in reinforced concrete compartments, it is unlikely that fires will cause these materials to escape from the storage areas. This also poses some risks to their health. Kovalets said the following on whether the fires in the region pose a risk. Some radioactive waste storage areas contain long-lived radioactive materials. in storage facilities where nuclear fuel residues are located, and this is not only true for Chernobyl, there is a possibility of an uncontrolled nuclear reaction restarting. But this does not mean a nuclear explosion. According to non-deputy director of the Institute for Safety Problems of Nuclear Power Plants, Sergei Paskovich, both experts are of the opinion that the amount of radiation from Chernobyl does not pose a threat to human health in Ukraine and surrounding countries today. The IAEA report said the forest fires in the Chernobyl region did not cause a dangerous increase in radioactive particles in the air. However, experts underline the need for further scientific research on the possible risks that traces of the Chernobyl disaster, the greatest environmental disaster in human history, may pose today.